Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here in Washington, D.C. Yesterday we attended an event at the Atlantic Council with the 5 policy directors from Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Finland, and Iceland, the 5 nations that make up the group of Nordic Defense Cooperation nations. And we're honored to have with us the CHOD, the Chief of Defense of Iceland, effectively, Mr. Arnór Sigurjónsson, who is with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because the Minister of Foreign Affairs is the Minister of Foreign Affairs as well as the Defense Minister. Sir, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Yesterday was a really great event, and from an Icelandic perspective, as the smallest nation in NATO, why is NORDEFCO so important, and why is NATO so important to Iceland's defense and security?
Well, there are 2 reasons. First, everything that has to do with Nordic cooperation is always very good. And it's very popular with the politicians and the public. NORDEFCO is a unique organization because it's an add-on. It's a value added on to the other organizations such as NATO. But the main purpose for us, for Iceland, in being a member of NORDEFCO is the political consultations and the information sharing. Because we don't have any national military forces, we are not so much concerned with the military capabilities, which are also a core function of NORDEFCO.
Even though you don't have military forces of your own and you have 2 fisheries protection vessels, throughout the Cold War, Iceland really was on the front line by hosting all manner of NATO units, particularly the U.S. Navy's maritime patrol base in Keflavik, Naval Air Station Keflavik. That was abruptly closed by Donald Rumsfeld when he was Defense Secretary during the Bush administration. Now efforts are back on to bring back a maritime patrol, to host maritime patrol aircraft on Iceland again. Bring us up to speed on the efforts to get that capability restarted.
Yes. First, I would like to say that, one of the reasons why we don't have our own national military forces is we are a very small nation, 355,000 people. If we went for the 2% goal that President Trump has given NATO, it would buy us probably 2 or 3 F-35s with no pilots and no life support. So it doesn't make much sense for us to do this, but we have Iceland in a strategic position in the North Atlantic where it acts as a permanent carrier. And the Naval Air Station, which was U.S. operated until 2006, was a very vital part of the North Atlantic security of the sea lanes of communications and reinforcement across the ocean from North America to Europe. This went away for a period of time, but it has gone back full power. Since 2014, with the Russian invasion of Crimea and Ukraine, we are now back where almost we were before. And the P-8s, the maritime patrol aircraft, they are operating out of what we call now Keflavik Air Base. And we are now operating all the military facilities and the integrated air and missile defense system in Iceland, which was left by the United States, in a good fashion, I would say. We are putting a lot of money into this, and we have added to our defense-related budget between 20 and 30% per annum since 2014. So we are doing our part of burden sharing. We are contributing in capabilities. We are contributing people to operations within NATO, in Afghanistan, and elsewhere. And so we feel comfortable with where we are in terms of security and defense.
One of the things that the President has been pushing is obviously this cost plus 50%. What kind of impact would that have on Iceland, just at a time when you're trying to reconstitute, you're working with the United States and with NATO to reconstitute the capability?
We don't have any permanent U.S. presence in Iceland. We have rotational forces that come and go as the operational tempo dictates. And so this will have no impact on Iceland because, as I understand it, this is primarily focused on nations that have permanent U.S. presence.
Is there any residual bad feeling to the decision? Because when the United States closed Keflavik, it was very abrupt, and the United States withdrew in about 3 months. I mean, is there any residual bad feeling about that decision?
With the younger generation, no. Many of them don't even remember this period. But with the older generation who are now retired or being retired, who fought hard political battles to keep this all together, there may be some resentment still. I wouldn't discount it.
Well, but time moves on, and right, time heals all wounds.
Yeah.
Climate change is obviously a big strategic driver in the region. It's affecting Iceland as it is every country. In the United States, there's concern about bases, for example, as permafrost melts. From an Icelandic perspective, and certainly in the Arctic, more sea ice melts, the more traffic will go through there. Iceland has become very popular with Chinese, for example. Everything from Chinese, Taiwanese, Singaporeans, anybody who's a major maritime nation has taken an interest in Iceland. Talk to us about climate change and its national security implications for your standpoint and the implications for NATO, and then I have some specific questions to ask you about China, for example.
I think the climate change is here as a fact, and we shouldn't and we cannot ignore it. We see it primarily in different weather patterns in Iceland and the reduction of the glaciers. So something is different from where it was 20 years ago. What it will lead to in the future, we don't know, but one of the more possible outcomes is the opening up of the northeastern Atlantic or Arctic route from the North Atlantic to the Pacific. And if this becomes viable, it's used today, but if it really becomes viable, it will reduce the sailing time of vessels moving from North Atlantic to the Pacific by about 40 days, saving a lot of money. And that will be a big game changer.
What will that mean for Iceland, right? Because if you want to set up bases, installations, shipyards, Iceland would be a logical place for that. What are both the positive and the potential negative implications from an Icelandic standpoint?
The positives will be economic benefits and employment, added infrastructure. The downside may be possibly that Iceland will become part of the global power competition, with China being one of the global powers that are interested in the Arctic. China has an Arctic security policy. The Arctic is part of their Belt and Road initiative. They call themselves a near Arctic nation, and they claim that the Arctic resources are a global domain. And so what will that lead to in the future down the road, we don't know, but there may be challenges.
What's the right approach? I mean, China has been very aggressive, trying to set up, for example, scientific installations that are not scientific installations. They're actually military or reconnaissance installations. We've seen that happen with Norwegians on Svalbard, for example. Almost every country has seen something like that happen. What's been the Icelandic experience in trying to sort out what is a legitimate Chinese investment and what is an illegitimate Chinese investment that is actually something that's designed to assert strategic influence?
Well, there's a lot of trade between Iceland and China, and so that's perfectly normal and nothing to be criticized. They have a research station up on the northeastern part of Iceland. It's a very small one. We had an incident a few years back when one of their businessmen tried to buy 300 square kilometers of tundra terrain up on the northeastern part, and that was not allowed by the government at the time.
It was supposed to be a golf course, I think.
Yes, it was well above 600 meters and snow 9 months out of 12, so I'm not sure that would have worked. But there you are. That's what we have had. I cannot say that we have had any overt Chinese commercial-driven or political-driven influence in Iceland.
One of the things which was kind of interesting was Svein Efjestads, who's the dean of the Scandinavian policy community, given that he's been doing it for a very long time and doing it exceptionally well, and obviously one of the strongest supporters of NATO in the region. He was talking about how contested the region will be for a prolonged period of time. That with all of the Arctic shelf claims, for example, he wisely noted that during the Atlantic Council event the number of unmanned underwater vehicles and unmanned aerial vehicles and how that changes the dynamic. From your standpoint, given that you're directly in the neighborhood, in the path of all of this, I mean, the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap was called that for a reason, and Iceland was kind of a key player in that. Do you think that this is going to be a much tenser and more contested region in the next decades that people have to pay a lot more attention to?
Well, we are taking over the chairmanship of the Arctic Council this year, and the government's hope and policy is that we will not militarize the Arctic, but military capabilities are being developed and deployed to the Arctic. So we do have a challenge, a security challenge down the road, whether we like it or not. But we hope to have cooperation and not confrontation. I would like to add that the defense relationship between Iceland and the United States is excellent. It's very good. It's been so for over 70 years. And hopefully Iceland is viewed as a reliable ally, and we certainly view the defense agreement with the United States as the most important part of this relationship.
Are you concerned at all? You know, there are a lot of concerns that some of the U.S. policies, whether it's cost plus 50, the pressure on the 2% to make it all about spending, you know, you discussed that a little bit earlier, is going to undermine the cohesion of the Atlantic Alliance. That here on the 70th anniversary, when everybody should be celebrating it, that there are going to be actually some frustrations will surface. We've seen, for example, the U.S. raise concerns about 5G technology, and Germany say, we're going to buy whatever we want to buy. From an Icelandic perspective, is there concern about cohesion of the Atlantic Alliance?
The solidarity has always been one of the glue that holds the alliance together, and everything that may weaken that glue, solidarity, is something to worry about, yes.
I have to ask you a lighthearted question. I was going to ask you an ice golf question because obviously the Chinese were trying to set up an ice golf competition or something like that. What is it about Icelandic hot dogs that makes them the best in the world?
I think that the fact that Bill Clinton came for a visit and had one in one of the most favorite hot dog places in Reykjavik made a difference.
Well, I remember when my son went to Iceland and I told him that he has to have an Icelandic hot dog, and he had one, and he said, "Oh my God, this is the best hot dog I've ever had."
I'm glad to hear it.
It's all part of the tourism drive. Sir, thanks very much. Arnór Sigurjónsson, the Defense Policy Chief of Iceland and certainly the Chad. Sir, thanks very, very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.